My wife secretly borrowed $250, $0 from her wealthy aunt, then forged my signature to buy a second house. Now she's filing for divorce and demanding half the property, claiming I knew everything. I never even knew she was in debt. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, writing about how my wife cheated on me and stole from her own family. But here I am. The truth is, it all unraveled so fast I barely had time to process it. One day, I was just a regular guy, working my job, coming home to my wife, Sarah, beautiful, ambitious, and honestly kind of a bitch. But I loved her, or at least I thought I did. She was always the type to hide her true feelings behind that sharp smile and snappy attitude. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but I thought we had a good thing going. We had a nice house, decent income, and I was under the impression that we were building a future together. I knew she had her moments of being high maintenance, but I dismissed them as part of her charm. That was until I started noticing strange things: missed calls, late nights, weird charges. On the credit card, nothing that screamed cheating, but enough to make me suspicious. It all started with little things. She'd leave her phone around, then suddenly she'd be secretive about it. She became distant, more irritable than usual. I'd come home and find her on her phone for hours, typing away in texts that disappeared when I looked over her shoulder. She started canceling plans with friends, and when I asked her about it, she'd brush it off with a snappy comment about how I was paranoid or insecure. But the biggest red flag was the phone bill. I happened to glance at it one night when she was in the shower, and I saw a number I didn't recognize. It was a female number, and it had been calling her late at night. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I found out she'd been texting someone named Lily almost obsessively. I brushed it off, telling myself maybe it was just a friend, but something in my gut told me it was more than that. Then came the financial stuff. I wasn't exactly a millionaire, but I was stable. I had a good job and we had enough to live comfortably. But I noticed strange charges on our bank account, big ones like thousands of dollars, on things I didn't recognize. I asked Sarah about it and she got defensive, claiming I was overreacting. But I knew better. I started digging into our finances secretly, going through bank statements and credit card bills. That's when I stumbled across something that hit me like a punch in the stomach. It turned out Sarah had borrowed $250, $0 from her wealthy aunt, something she never told me about. She forged my signature to buy a second house, claiming it was for us, that it was an investment. I was stunned. How could she do that behind my back? It wasn't just about the money, it was the betrayal of trust. She lied to me about everything, and I had no idea. And then I found out she was sleeping with her boss, Mark. I saw texts explicit, disgusting messages where she was begging him to meet up, talking about how much she needed him, and how she couldn't keep her hands off him anymore. I found out she'd been sneaking out late at night, going to hotel rooms with him, all while pretending everything was fine at home. The worst part, she still insisted she was the victim, that I was paranoid, that I was overreacting. She told me I was insecure because I never wanted to have sex lately, that I was jealous and controlling. But I knew the truth. This wasn't just a fling or a mistake. It was a full-blown affair, and she was lying through her teeth to cover it up. When I confronted her, she turned on me with that same bitchy attitude, yelling that I was ruining her life, that I was a terrible husband for not trusting her. She claimed I knew everything about her debts and her affair, which was a blatant lie. I never even suspected she was in debt. She'd kept that hidden from me, just like she hid the affair. The betrayal hit me hard, but what hurt the most was how she spun it, making me feel like I was the bad guy. I felt numb. I was angry, betrayed, and completely lost. How could she do this? How could she lie about everything? I was starting to realize that my marriage was a facade, and the woman I thought I knew was a master manipulator. I knew I had to decide what to do next, but I wasn't sure I was ready for what was coming. After I uncovered all that, I didn't sleep for days. I kept replaying everything in my head: the missed signs, the late nights, the way she'd look at me with that sly little smile, like she was hiding some big secret. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut a dozen times over. I kept asking myself how I missed all of it, how I didn't see the signs, how I could have been so blind. The first thing I did was dig deeper into the financial mess she created. I got access to her emails, her bank accounts, everything I could find. It was like peeling back layers of a lie. I discovered she'd borrowed that $250, $0 from her aunt, which I had no idea about. She forged my signature to buy a second house, an entire property I never knew about. That was the biggest shock of all. She told her family she was investing in real estate, but it was clear she was just running up debt, using me as a cover. I also found out she'd been secretly funneling money into her affair with Mark. I found emails where she was talking about sneaking out, planning rendezvous, and even paying for hotel rooms with the fake mortgage money she'd borrowed. It was sickening. She used her aunt's money as a tool for her own selfish needs, never once considering how it would destroy us. I remember sitting there, staring at all the evidence, feeling a mix of anger and heartbreak. I'd been a good husband, worked hard, paid the bills, tried to keep things smooth. And she was out there, lying, cheating, stealing from her own family, and pretending everything was fine. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach repeatedly, like I was living someone else's nightmare. Then the confrontation happened. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I called her at work, told her I knew everything. I wanted her to come home so we could talk face to face. When she showed up, she was defensive, angry, and dismissive. She kept lying, twisting her words, calling me paranoid, accusing me of spying on her. She told me she was sick of my accusations, that I was controlling and jealous, but I knew better. I knew the truth, and I had all the evidence to back it up. She tried to spin her story, claiming she only cheated because I was neglectful, that I never wanted sex anymore. She said she was under a lot of stress, and that Mark was just a distraction. She even went so far as to say I was the reason she had to cheat, that I drove her to it. That was the moment I realized she was a master manipulator. She was good at turning things around, making me doubt myself. I felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, sadness, and a strange sense of numbness. I'd loved her, cared for her, and now I saw her for what she really was: a liar, a thief, and an adulteress. I couldn't believe I had been so blind. I thought I knew her, but I didn't even recognize her true face. In that moment, I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when I had all this evidence of her deception. I told her she had to leave, that I wanted her out of the house, out of my life. She yelled, called me names, said I was overreacting, but I didn't care. I felt like I was finally waking up from a nightmare. The next few days were a blur. I contacted a lawyer, started sorting out the legal mess she'd created. I found out she was planning to file for divorce, claiming I knew about her debts and her affair all along. That was her way of trying to manipulate the situation, to turn it around so she'd have some control. But I had proof, screenshots, emails, bank statements, that she was lying. Honestly, I felt relief and rage at the same time. Relief because I finally knew the truth, and rage because she'd betrayed me so completely. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair or the money. It was about how she'd lied to me for years, how she'd used me and my trust as a game. I kept asking myself how I could rebuild after this, if I even wanted to. But deep down, I knew I'd never trust her again. It's been a whirlwind since then. I'm still trying to process everything: how someone I loved and trusted could do something so calculated and cruel. The hardest part isn't just the betrayal, it's realizing how much I lost: my sense of security, my trust, and the hope I had for our future. I keep telling myself I'll get through it, but some days are harder than others. All I know is I never saw it coming. The moment I told her to leave, everything shifted into chaos. She screamed, called me names, accused me of spying and controlling her life, but I was beyond caring at that point. I just wanted her gone. I remember standing there, watching her pack her things, her bitchy smirk never leaving her face. It was like watching a stranger, someone I didn't even recognize anymore. She kept insisting she was the victim, that I was the one who was controlling and paranoid. She threw in some classic lines: "You never wanted me to have any fun. You're just insecure, and you're jealous of Mark." Honestly, I wanted to punch her in the face for even saying that. The nerve of her, twisting everything around to make herself look innocent. But I knew better. I had the receipts, the proof of her affair, her lies, her theft. I felt this weird mix of relief and anger. Relief because I finally had concrete evidence, and anger because I'd been played for a fool for so long. I kept thinking about all the years I spent trying to make this work, and how she'd been planning her escape, her lies, her affair, all while pretending to be the perfect wife. It was like a slap in the face every time I uncovered another lie. Once she finally left, I sat alone in the house. It was eerily quiet. I looked around at the life I thought I had, and it hit me hard. This wasn't just about her cheating or stealing money. It was about my entire sense of security crumbling. I'd always believed in honesty, trust, loyalty, things that now felt like distant memories. I started making calls to my lawyer. I wanted to understand my options, how I could protect myself legally from her manipulations. She was already talking about filing for divorce and demanding half the property, claiming I knew everything about her debts and her affair. That was her way of trying to control the narrative, but I had proof she was lying. I was furious that she thought she could just spin her web of lies and get away with it. In the days that followed, I got to work on my own plans. I downloaded all the evidence, texts, emails, bank statements, and organized everything. I knew I had to be ready for the legal battle ahead. At the same time, I was trying to keep my emotions in check. The betrayal cut deep, and some nights I'd lie awake, wondering how I missed all the signs. How did I let her get away with this for so long? The financial mess she created was staggering. She'd borrowed that $250, $0 from her aunt, forged my signature, and bought a second house. That house was now a ticking time bomb. I was furious that she'd used her family's trust and generosity to fund her own selfish needs, never once thinking about what it would do to us. I knew I had to fight to keep what was legally mine, but part of me wondered if I even wanted to stay in this marriage anymore. Once she was gone, I felt the house was emptier than ever. The silence was deafening. I kept replaying everything she said, everything she did, trying to find some reason, some justification, but there was none. Only betrayal. I thought about the future, whether I should try to rebuild my life or just cut my losses and move on. Honestly, I was leaning toward moving on. I didn't want to be with someone who could lie, cheat, and steal from her own family, then turn around and blame me for her mistakes. I started thinking about the money, the house, the betrayal, how I would fight for what was rightfully mine. I knew she'd try to manipulate the situation, maybe even claim I was aware of her debts all along, but I had the evidence to prove I was. I felt betrayed, angry, and exhausted. I'd never been the confrontational type, but now I was ready to fight for everything I'd worked for. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I'd been living in a dream. That woman I married, the one I thought I knew, was just a facade. Beneath it all, she was selfish, manipulative, and reckless. I didn't want to be part of her game anymore. The house, the money, the lies, they all felt like symbols of how badly I'd been betrayed. It was a painful lesson, but one I knew I'd have to learn to live with. Every day since she left, I've been trying to pick up the pieces. I don't know what's next, but I do know one thing. I'll never trust her again, and I'll fight tooth and nail to keep what's mine. Trust is gone, but I still have my dignity. That's what I keep reminding myself. After she moved out, the house felt like a mausoleum. It was dead silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant hum of traffic outside. I'd spend hours just sitting on the couch, staring at the walls, trying to piece together everything that had happened. I kept thinking about how I never saw it coming, the lies, the theft, the affair. It was like she'd been wearing a mask the entire time, and I was just too blind to see it. The thing that gnawed at me most was the money. The $250, $0 she borrowed from her aunt, her own family, and forged my signature to buy that second house. She told her family it was an investment, but I knew better. I found the mortgage papers, the signatures, and the transfer of funds. She used her aunt's trust and generosity as a tool for her own selfish needs. That betrayal cut deep. I'd always believed in family loyalty, but she had shattered that trust with her greed and lies. I remember going through her emails and texts, trying to find some way to understand her mindset. That's when I saw the messages with Mark, her boss. They were explicit, full of promises and desperate pleas for her to meet him to keep their affair secret. I couldn't believe she'd been sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face about everything. She'd even paid for hotel rooms with the money she stole, and I had proof. It was like a punch to the gut every time I uncovered another lie. The day I confronted her was the day everything changed. I called her at work, told her I knew everything about the affair, the money, the lies. She showed up furious, trying to deny everything. Her voice was shrill, accusing me of spying, of invading her privacy, of being controlling. She kept saying I was paranoid, that I didn't trust her, that I was the problem, but I had everything documented. I was calm, cold even, as I told her she needed to leave and never come back. She argued, yelled, and threw tantrums. She called me a jealous, insecure bastard, claimed I was ruining her life. She even dared to say that I was the reason she cheated, that I didn't give her enough attention, that I was neglectful. That's when I realized how manipulative she was. She was good at turning things around, making herself look innocent while painting me as the villain. Honestly, I felt a strange mixture of relief and rage. Relief because I finally knew the truth, and rage because I'd been played for a fool. All those years I thought we were building a life together, and she was secretly planning her escape, her affair, her theft. I couldn't believe I trusted her that much. It was like waking up from a nightmare, only to find out that everything I believed was a lie. After she left, I sat in the silence of the house and just stared at the empty space she'd left behind. I felt hollow. All the trust I had in her was gone, erased by her lies and betrayal. I started making calls to my lawyer, trying to understand what I was entitled to and how to protect myself legally. She was already talking about divorce, demanding half the property, claiming I knew everything about her debts and her affair. I had proof she was lying, but I knew she'd try to manipulate the system to her advantage. That's when I realized I needed to get serious about fighting for what's mine. I spent the next few days gathering everything: bank statements, texts, emails, everything that could be used as evidence. I wanted to make sure I was prepared for the legal battle ahead. I was angry, yes, but I also felt a strange sense of determination. I wasn't going to let her walk away with my house, my money, or my dignity. Not after all she'd done. The financial damage she caused was staggering. I found out she'd taken that huge loan from her aunt, forged my signature, and bought a second house. That house was now a symbol of her greed and deceit. I couldn't believe she'd use her family's trust to fund her own selfish needs. I knew I had to fight to keep what was legally mine, but part of me was tired of fighting. I kept asking myself whether I even wanted to stay in this marriage anymore. Could I ever trust her again after all this? Every day since she left, I've been trying to make sense of it all. I keep replaying the betrayal, trying to understand how someone I loved could do this to me. I feel angry, betrayed, and exhausted. I thought I knew her, but I was so wrong. The woman I married was just a stranger hiding behind a pretty face. Now I'm left to pick up the pieces. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know I'll never trust her again, and I'll do everything I can to protect what's mine. That's the only thing I can hold on to now, my own integrity. The days after she moved out felt like walking through a fog. Every morning I woke up with a heavy weight in my chest, knowing I was alone in this house that once felt full of life. I kept thinking about her, how she manipulated everything, how she lied to everyone, including her own family, just to get what she wanted. That second house, that huge loan, the forged signature. She'd done all of it without a second thought, and I was left to deal with the fallout. I threw myself into organizing everything. I spent hours at my laptop, gathering every piece of evidence I could find: bank statements, emails, texts, even her secret phone logs. I wanted to be ready for the fight I knew was coming. She was already planning to file for divorce, claiming I knew about her debts and her affair all along, trying to paint herself as the victim. I had proof she was lying, but I also knew that wouldn't stop her from spinning her own story. The thing that cut the deepest was the betrayal of trust. I'd always believed honesty was the foundation of marriage, but she had shattered that. She lied about everything: her debts, her affair, her plans. She used her family's trust to fund her own reckless lifestyle, all while pretending to be the perfect wife. I kept asking myself how I missed all the signs, how I didn't see the cracks forming. The truth was, I was blinded by love, and she took advantage of that. I remember sitting in the living room one night, staring at the empty space where she used to sit. It was eerily quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside. The silence was deafening. I felt like I'd lost not just my wife but a part of myself. How could she have done this? How could she be so cold and calculating? I was furious at her, yes, but mostly I felt betrayed by her lies, her theft, her affair. It was like waking up from a nightmare and realizing everything I believed in was a lie. I finally met with my lawyer. We went over everything I'd uncovered. I wanted to understand my legal rights, how to protect my assets, and ensure she couldn't manipulate the situation to her advantage. She was already talking about splitting everything down the middle, claiming I was aware of her debts and her affair. But I had the proof to show she'd been lying all along. I knew I had to prepare for a tough fight, but part of me wondered if I even wanted to stay married anymore. More than anything, I was angry at her for using my trust and our marriage as a cover for her reckless greed and infidelity. The fact that she'd borrowed so much money from her own aunt, her family, without telling me was a slap in the face. She forged my signature on mortgage documents, bought a second house, and then lied about it all. I kept thinking about how she'd used her aunt's generosity to fund her own selfish needs, never once considering how it would destroy us. In those quiet moments, I'd sit alone and think about the future. Was I going to fight for my marriage? Could I forgive her? The truth was, I didn't see how I could. After all she'd done, trust was broken beyond repair. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone who was manipulative, selfish, and reckless. The house, the money, the lies, they all felt like symbols of her betrayal. Every day now is a struggle. I wake up, try to start over, and remind myself that I'm better off without her. I've learned a lot through this ordeal about trust, deception, and the importance of protecting myself. I realize I can't change what's happened, but I can control how I move forward. I've decided to fight for what's rightfully mine, to stand up against her attempts to manipulate and take everything I worked for. Most of all, I've learned that love isn't enough if it's built on lies. I thought I was with someone who cared, who was loyal. Turns out, she was just good at pretending. I don't regret loving her, but I regret trusting her blindly. Now, I'm just trying to rebuild my life, piece by piece, and look ahead to a future where honesty and integrity matter more than ever. Whatever comes next, I know I'll come out of this stronger, and that's what keeps me going. It's been a few months since she left, and honestly, I'm still trying to piece everything back together. Some days are better than others, but the sting of betrayal never really goes away. I keep telling myself that I'm better off without her, that I dodged a bullet, that I'm finally free from the web of lies she spun. Still, there's this lingering sense of loss, like mourning someone I once loved but who turned out to be someone I never truly knew. Looking back, I realize how naive I was to trust so blindly. I always thought honesty was the cornerstone of marriage, but she proved me wrong. She lied about the debts, about the affair, about everything that mattered. Her greed and manipulation almost cost me everything: my marriage, my peace, my sense of security. But I also learned an important lesson. Trust isn't given blindly, and sometimes you have to see the red flags before they turn into wrecking balls. I fought hard to protect what I could: my house, my savings, my dignity. I went through legal battles, gathering evidence, standing my ground. I knew she'd try to spin the story in her favor, but I refused to let her manipulate the truth. When the divorce was finalized, it felt like a weight lifted, even if it was tinged with sadness. I knew I deserved better, and I was finally free to start over, to rebuild my life on my own terms. Now I spend my days focusing on myself, working out, reconnecting with friends, and trying to forget the woman who once seemed like my everything. I've learned not to take trust for granted, and I've become more cautious about who I let into my life. I know there are no guarantees, but I also know that I let anyone manipulate or betray me again. Most importantly, I've come to accept that sometimes love isn't enough. It's honesty, respect, and loyalty that keep a relationship strong. Without those, everything falls apart. I see now how people can hide their true selves behind smiles and lies, and I've learned to be more vigilant. I don't regret loving her. Love is never a mistake, but I regret not seeing the warning signs sooner. Finally, I want anyone reading this who's going through something similar to know this. Trust your instincts. Don't ignore the red flags. When something feels wrong, it probably is. Gather your evidence, stand your ground, and don't let anyone manipulate you into thinking you're overreacting. You're worth more than lies, theft, and betrayal. I've come out of this battered but stronger. I've rediscovered my self-worth, and I'm finally starting to believe in the possibility of a better, honest future. The pain will fade, and someday, I'll look back and see this as the chapter that taught me what real integrity looks like. For now, I'll keep moving forward, one step at a time, knowing I did everything I could to protect myself and what truly matters.